Welcome, correctors, to another episode of Corrected, or the Correct Movement educational videos, where we discuss the 3 point agenda even further in order to better understand what it is. And for today's episode, we are going to discuss creating and destroying political dynasties. We will be referencing a paper by a Canadian economist, Dr. Matthew Godwin. His paper is entitled Parliamentary Privilege, Kinship in Canada's Parliament. This is to help us better understand how we would actually be able to eradicate, if not eradicate, drastically reduce the influence and power of political dynasties in the Philippines. Now, before we even proceed, and before anybody actually accepts the 3 point agenda of the correct movement, we would actually have to accept some realities first. And if we do not accept these realities, we would not be able to accept the true solutions to the problems of the Philippines. So, for this video, I would just like everybody to try to accept this reality that Filipinos are equally human with other nationalities. It doesn't matter what other nationalities would think of us or what we think of other nationalities, we're actually equal with them. So, when everything is broken down from flesh, skin, bone, down to the DNA, we would actually be totally at par with other nationalities. So, to explain this further, this means that technology, medicines, programs, and systems used by other nationalities can also be used by Filipinos. So if a Norwegian person has a fever and takes paracetamol, they would be relieved of their fever, at least temporarily. And that's the same with Filipinos. If we have a fever and we take that medication, then we would be relieved. And let's say if a Japanese person drives a Mitsubishi, then it's also applicable that a Filipino can also drive a Mitsubishi, so long as that person, the Japanese person and the Filipino person, have learned how to drive. Uh, if a Chinese person would know how to cook fried rice, right? A Filipino can also learn how to cook fried rice. So this type of reality is something that everybody needs to understand in order to move forward with this advocacy. So, with that being said, let's understand first that the context of Dr. Matthew Godwin's paper is actually the Canadian experience as compared to the Philippine experience. So, why are we doing this? Is because, again, based on the reality that I've mentioned, Filipinos and other nationalities are equally human. So, whatever experience they've had in disciplining themselves or solving a particular problem can be equally applied to the Philippine context. So, it doesn't matter what cultures we actually have. If we are going to use the similar systems, then we will have similar outcomes. There will be slight variations, and that's another thing that we also need to accept, but the outcomes would actually be similar. So let's begin. So the first thing that we need to discuss is how political dynasties are formed. So according to Dr. Godwin, these dynasties are formed due to relational advantages. So we can see there on the list, it says longer political tenure, inheritance of institutional knowledge, networks and financial resources, and family brand from past and present title holders. Let's discuss this in detail. Number one, longer political tenure. So, this is very self explanatory. The longer a politician has served in office, the higher the likelihood is of a family member to enter politics. And this, for me, is the single most important factor out of all the relational advantages that you have seen on the list. Because of longer political tenure, this would actually spring up different kinds of advantages for family members to enter politics. And we'll see that further. Let's go to number two, inheritance of institutional knowledge. Now, because of long political tenures, the seniors would learn the ways of politics. increase knowledge about the ways of politics, which can then be passed down to a family member. Now, this can also be seen in families who are doctors, firemen, policemen, nurses, teachers, etc. This is also applicable to a family of politicians. So, once again, we can see long political tenures contribute to this. Number three, networks and financial resources. So, these long political tenures establish connections with people who know about the ways of politics, which can then be passed down to a family member. It hasn't been explained further in this slide how financial resources actually come in the picture. As business people would already know, networks actually also allow access to financial resources. In the case of politicians, that would be sponsors if they are not already rich. But of course, if the politician is already rich, in the case of Mr. Manny Pacquiao, then he would be able to fund his own political campaign. So that's another advantage for family members. Number four, relational advantage. The family brand from past and present title holders. So political names become famous during campaign, election, and term periods and are therefore beneficial to family members who wish to enter politics. So as we can see in the photo, we can see the Estrada political dynasty. All of them have benefited from each other from the long political tenure of Mr. Joseph Estrada. So you can see the sons there, they've entered politics up into the highest possible position that each of them can get, and that is the senator position. Let's go to the next part of the problem. How did these political dynasties increase in number? The factors would actually shock a lot of people. Number one is poverty or wealth access. Number two is term limits. And number three is pork barreling. And let's understand further on what Dr. Godwin mentioned in his paper. So the first factor, as mentioned, is poverty or wealth access. Those who have better financial status have the higher likelihood of joining politics, including inheritance. So people who have lots of money, who are already rich, they have the higher likelihood of joining politics. And sometimes they don't even have to be rich. They just have to have a status or a place in the upper middle income slate of society. When you see there, including inheritance, so that means that wealth that has been inherited, familial wealth, was inherited by the lower members of the family, can be capitalized to enter politics or join politics. Next, the second factor of why the dynasties have increased is actually term limits. So, Dr. Godwin has cited a paper by another political analyst named Dr. Kerubin, and he explained there politicians whose plans are cut off by term limits encourage family members to replace them. It's happened in the Philippine context. So when a bridge doesn't get finished in time and the term limit of the politician has actually come, he would then encourage his wife or his kids to take his place in the election campaign period. So instead of actually serving the purpose of reducing the dynasties and reducing the abuse in politics, term limits have actually contributed to the increase of abuse in politics. The third factor is pork barreling, and that is funding regional, provincial, and municipal projects from national funds. Okay, so as we can see there, this will help retain political names during campaign season. This is especially helpful to candidates who run for national positions. Those positions are vice president, senators, and of course, sometimes we would see congressmen actually take advantage of this. That's why we would see construction projects bearing the name of congressmen or congressional candidates on those posters or tarpaulins that we see there. Now, there's another sad reality that we have to accept. Across all nations, political dynasties cannot be totally eliminated. Even in the most honest Asian country that we can find, I think all of us will have a consensus of saying Japan is the most honest and perhaps it has the cleanest government out there. They have political dynasties. We cannot eradicate them. We cannot zero their number. They can only be reduced to an acceptable number. So, how do we do it? So, Dr. Godwin has found factors observed in Canada. And this is the way that we're actually going to do it in the Philippines. And these are number one, we increase the number of middle to upper middle income voters. We remove term limits. Number two. Number three, remove pork barreling. Number four, increase frequent replacement of politicians. And number five is we adopt the parliamentary system. We'll go to that in detail. So the first step, or the one of the steps in solving this problem, is to create a majority of middle to upper middle income voters. Dr. Godwin explains it like this: the higher the number of people who have access to more money, the greater the chance they have to compete against incumbents. As mentioned earlier, how are political dynasties formed? These dynasties are formed similar to starting the career of any politician. It requires money because of the campaign. And money is a factor in any country. It could be a presidential system or a parliamentary system. Campaigns would require funding. And this is one of the reasons why competition against those established in political office can be done if we have a greater number of upper middle income voters or upper middle income citizens. They would actually be able to go against those people already entrenched in office. That already happened in Canada, and that can also happen in the Philippines. Now, of course, how are we going to do this? We have lots of people who are suffering in poverty right now. That is why one of the advocacies of the Correct movement is to open up to more foreign direct investors. As we know, foreign direct investors contribute to the generation of more and more jobs. And if there are more jobs and there are applicants, then there would be higher salary offers. And that would jumpstart the career of any person who would wish to enter into politics. And not just politics, it could be business and other types of careers. Number two, remove term limits. Now, of course, as we mentioned, term limits have increased the number of political dynasties in the Philippines, as mentioned by Dr. Kerubin, that was quoted by the paper that we are discussing today, the author of which is Dr. Matthew Godwin. So why do we need to remove term limits? Because it removes the feeling of the need to get a family member to continue their projects and plans. So as mentioned there in the slide, incumbents will not need to encourage family members to replace them after a term limit, and they can be subjected to competition with fresh candidates. So just imagine a congressman that has no term limits, that was subjected to an election every 5 years. Since he does not have the fear of being disqualified after the end of each and every term, then he would not think about fielding his wife or his kids in election campaigns because he knows that he can still run for office in the next upcoming election. That is how we discourage them from collecting more and more of their family members into joining election campaigns. It's hard for a lot of people to accept this, but this is the reality. It's happened in Canada. It will also happen to us. Remember, we have accepted the reality that we are all equally human. Let's go to factor number 3. We need to remove pork barreling. So projects must be funded by the political subunit where it is located to avoid the promotion of political names. And this is how Canada has done it. Their national government is not allowed to fund construction projects, livelihood projects. They're located in the political subunits. What are the political subunits of Canada? Those are the provinces, the federated provinces of Canada. The government that would fund these projects and programs are the provincial governments only. They're the ones who would look for the money, they're the ones who would look for the staff, and they would be the ones to implement the project or the plan. The national government would have nothing to do with it. Therefore, the focus of the electorate or the voters would be the people who are nearest to them, which are the provincial government officials. So, this is another factor that needs to be done in the Philippines. Next, we also need to increase the frequency of replacement. So, mechanisms must be in place to help remove unwanted politicians from office as soon as possible. Now, of course, we cannot do this under the presidential system. And why is that? Because the chief executives cannot be removed by a simple vote of no confidence by the legislative body. So, what does that mean? It means that the mayor cannot be removed by the councilors. The governors cannot be removed by the sangguniang panlalawigan, and the president cannot be removed by the lower house or the congressman. It has to be through a trial in the Senate called an impeachment. So we really can't do that under the presidential system. We can only do this under a parliamentary system. And number 5, of course, we adopt the parliamentary system. So the politicians must move together as teams and not as individuals to reduce the focus on their names and their personal agenda. So think about this, correctors. The politicians, when forwarding a proposal for a bill, a law, or whatever they're proposing, they would have to propose it under the name of their political party. And they cannot propose it under their own personal name. The reason behind that is because the bills need to be voted upon in parliamentary systems based on party affiliation and not loyalty to the president. Because in parliamentary systems, the presidents have nothing to do with government. So I hope we have learned from this and we accept the realities that we have to face when we advocate for these constitutional reforms. We understand better the best practices that are being done in other countries and apply it to the Philippines. Thank you so much and see you in the next video.